Shedding a Little Light, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction, written and narrated by Christina. Marinette caught Adrien's eye and gave him a small wave as she made her way to sit at the desk behind him. She was determined to listen to Tikki's advice and not let her mind get ahead of herself again. There was no reason she had to agonize over a potential relationship when neither of them had even asked her in the first place, and they still had plenty of time to figure things out before making any permanent life decisions. The flutters in her heart were another matter, but she quickly shushed them and tried to keep it out of her mind as much as possible. Miss Bustier lightly clapped her hands, causing the low hum in the room to settle. "Attention, students, I have some exciting news. Professor Damocles has agreed to let the class join Ladybug and Cat Noir in decorating the neighborhood as one of our service projects this year." Marinette's eyes widened in alarm. As much as she wanted more people to join and appreciated that her school wanted to support the project, she also knew Marinette and Ladybug couldn't be in the same place at once. Adrien raised his hand. "Is it all right for me to be excused? I don't think my father will allow me to participate." Miss Bustier tilted her head sympathetically, though her eyes flashed with determination. "Don't worry, Adrien. Even your father couldn't say no to this project. It's for a good cause with added school credit, and there will be plenty of adult supervision, not to mention perfectly safe with Paris's own superheroes attending. I'll even write him personally to make sure he allows you to go." It would have been almost imperceptible had she not been sitting directly behind him, but Marinette was almost certain she saw Adrien's shoulders slump defeatedly as he slid a little deeper into his seat, despite his polite response of, "Thank you, Miss Bustier." Marinette tilted her head curiously. Normally, Adrien would do anything he could to be a part of a school activity, especially one that involved helping others, and she knew for a fact that this project was important to him. Ollie had nudged her arm meaningfully with a questioning look, reminding Marinette she had other things to worry about. Time to play in her own excuse. "Miss Bustier?" Marinette felt a sudden sense of dread fall over her as the teacher's face brightened excitedly at the sight of her raised hand. Marinette, do you have any suggestions for us? As class representative, I'm sure you can help our class think of ways to make a valuable contribution to this effort. I talked to your parents and they said you've already been serving in this project for quite some time. Is there anything the class should know before coming to this event?" Marinette froze as all eyes turned on her, including the piercing glare from Chloe and the only slightly veiled look of scorn directed from Lila. "Well, I was going to say everyone should dress warmly since we'll be outside most of the time, and..." Her voice faltered as Chloe shot her an exaggerated eye roll. She caught sight of Adrien smiling encouragingly at her, and she braved on, her voice strengthening as she added, "And if anyone could bring an extra ladder or step stool, that would help a lot, since there's usually not enough for everyone." "Thank you, Marinette. That is certainly something we can all keep in mind. Mark your calendars, everyone, and don't forget to keep an eye out for step stools we can use. Now, turn your books to page 507. Marinette slumped back into her desk with a sigh, grateful to finally have the attention moved elsewhere. It looked like Ladybug would have to be the no-show this week. Ladybug paced back and forth across the narrow rooftop, fiddling with her fingers slightly as she waited for her partner to arrive for their daily patrol. It was already dark out, and although she knew that was pretty normal for winter weather, it was unlike Cat Noir to be this late. She was about to check her bug phone again when a soft thud reached her ears and she turned to see Cat Noir emerging from the shadows behind her. "Sorry I'm late, m'lady. I got a bit held up." "No worries, I'm just glad you can make it. Shall we start?" He nodded with a grin, though it looked as if he had something else on his mind. They finished their rounds quickly and stopped for a short break at their usual place to rest for a bit before either had to head home. Ladybug hid a smile as she watched Cat Noir absently scoop up small clumps of snow from where he sat and mold them into mini figures to sit along the rooftop beside them. "So, our last Christmas project is this Saturday?" Ladybug stiffened at the mention of the upcoming event, knowing she would have to break it to him that she wasn't going to be there. Cat Noir didn't seem to notice as he added 2 small lumps for ears to the tiny mound of snow and used a clawed finger to trace a pair of whiskers along the snow cat's face. "Yeah, about that. I'm not going to be able to make it on Saturday." "What?" "I tried to get out of it, but there's something I really have to do, and I'm sure you'll be able to do fine without me. You're great at working with people, and I trust you completely. Cat Noir shifted uncomfortably. Oh, well, thanks, Mighty, but I don't think I'll be able to make it either. He lifted a hand to his neck with a nervous chuckle. That's actually why I brought it up. Ladybug raised an eyebrow and held her chin thoughtfully. I'd hate to have to call it off, and there's enough adults involved. They should be fine without us, right? I can talk to some of the ones who've been with us since the beginning and make sure they have everything they need, so things can run smoothly. Sounds good to me. Cat Noir dusted himself off as he got to his feet before extending a hand to Ladybug and pulling her up beside him. Thanks again for making this happen, Ladybug. You never know how much a little kindness might mean to someone. And I know we definitely make Christmas better for a lot of people. All thanks to you, Kitty Cat. It was your big heart that started this thing in the first place. And it's far from over. Her eyes twinkled as she added, we still have to take all these decorations down, you know. Cat Noir tilted his head back with a laugh. Yeah, but I won't mind that if it means more time with you. The words slipped out naturally, and she noticed him tense slightly, as if unsure of how she would take it. But Ladybug let it go and instead ducked her head with a shy smile. Cat Noir relaxed and turned to leave. See you later, Ladybug. She watched him go, then quickly swung off in the direction of home. Will you please just go to sleep already? Plagg moaned, burying his ears further under the thick coverlet. What does it take to get some peace in this place? If you keep twisting yourself around, you're going to turn into a pretzel, and not the cheese-stuffed kind. Adrien sighed. I'm sorry, Plagg. I'll try to be more careful. Have you tried my counting the top 10 cheese varieties strategy? Then you can list them by smelliest, cheesiest, gooeyest. Ooh, I'm getting good dreams already. The Kwamee's voice warmed with enthusiasm, and Adrien couldn't help but chuckle at his Kwamee's zealous appetite. Thanks for the suggestion, but I don't think that'll work for me. Too bad. You don't know what you're missing. Adrien shook his head with a smile and leaned back against the pillows, closing his eyes and trying to concentrate on falling asleep. Instead, it was the same thoughts flooding over him like an endless loop. He stifled a groan and rolled off his bed, giving up on sleep and pulling on a sweatshirt, tugging it closer around him as he moved to stand in front of the wide windows, his mind swirling around in circles as he watched the falling snow. He found himself half hoping to see the same enchanting blue eyes appear out of the darkness, and his gaze wandered to the multicolored lights reflecting off the darkened glass. Memories from a few nights before drifted up to him. He felt a familiar ache settle in his chest. He had been trying to distance himself for a while now. While she was still special to him, he knew Ladybug didn't want to seem that way. And although he still teased and flirted with her occasionally, it was more out of habit and leaning toward playful banter rather than anything else. She didn't seem to mind, and when facing fearsome and brutal supervillains, it was helpful and important to lighten the mood. He was still in love with her, though. Her visit the other night had proven that. He tried not to be, but he just couldn't help himself. She was so amazing and gracious and clever. He loved everything about her. Even though she kept rejecting him, even though he knew she was in love with someone else, he still loved her. And he loved her enough to want to let her go. But the only time he thought he could was when he was with Marinette. Adrien felt his cheeks warm as the thought surfaced in his mind, but this time he didn't push it away. He wanted to love Marinette. She was every bit as amazing as Ladybug. He'd even called her that, like the blind fool he was at the picnic they shared together, and it was still true to this day. She was always looking out for others and making a difference even in the smallest of ways. She wasn't as assertive and outgoing as Ladybug. She had a fierceness and dedication that often surprised him, and she was never shy when it came to speaking out about what was right. Marinette was more timid and relentlessly clumsy, but that drew him to her all the more, as he found it adorable, and he liked knowing he could look out for her and be the one to catch her if she should fall. He wanted to protect her and take care of her, and what's more, he knew that she would protect and take care of him too. She was so kind and funny, brave and sweet, smart, pretty, gentle, and best of all, she seemed to really care for him and saw him for who he truly was. He would do anything for Marinette. He loved Marinette. His heart seemed to stop as he came to that realization. It was as if a light switch had finally been flicked on in his head. There was a part of him that had always loved her, small and uncertain at first, but steadily grew and softened as the wondrous girl took up more and more room in his heart. He felt his spirits rise and a joyful smile fill across his face, for it was swiftly dashed by a wave of guilt and distress. He wanted to love Marinette, but how could he when he was still enamored by another girl? It wouldn't be fair to her, and he was infuriating about himself. What kind of twisted, unloyal person was he? Sure, one could argue that he was being loyal, as his heart was still bound to Ladybug. But if he truly respected her wishes, he would have moved on a long time ago, and he clearly wasn't devoted to her either if Marinette could so easily sweep his feelings aside. He groaned in frustration and wearily threw himself against the couch, shamefully burying his head against the cushions. Don't tell me it's love problems again. Plagg hovered over him, his arms crossed in annoyance, though his tone carried an unusual note of sympathy. Adrien rolled over and gestured helplessly toward the ceiling. What do I do, Plagg? Marinette is amazing, and I think I'm in love with her. But whenever I try to give up on Ladybug, she does something that makes me fall in love with her all over again. And no matter how hard I try, I just can't seem to change my feelings for her. But now I think I have feelings for Marinette too, which is awful and wonderful, but terrible, since that means I'm a horrible person, and it wouldn't be fair to either of them. I love Marinette, I really, really do, as much as I ever loved Ladybug, if not more so. But how can I when one word from Ladybug sets fireworks off inside me, and I'm as drawn to her now as the day we met? Nothing makes sense anymore, and I feel like my heart is exploding and melting at the same time. Plagg rolled his eyes and deliberately took a large bite out of the cheese he was holding. You always make things so dramatic. Why do you have to choose? Adrien sat up in disbelief, then glared at the insolent Kwame. Because it wouldn't be right, that's why. If I don't choose, I might lead both of them on, and myself for that matter. Plagg shifted, leaning backwards as he sat midair and carelessly popped another bite of cheese into his mouth. I mean, why do you have to choose right now? Right now you're just kittens, playing around and figuring things out. You all have plenty of time before you're full-grown cats and have mate selection issues to worry about. Plagg! Adrien felt a sudden warmth burn up to his ears as he chucked a pillow in Plagg's direction, only to have the small Kwame dive around it and remain beside him unfazed. What I'm saying is, you don't have to rush everything all at once. You can take your time and let things play out on their own. His voice softened with a rare fondness as he added, You're not a horrible person, Adrien. If anything, you're one of the best holders I've ever known. And the fact you're even upset about this says a lot about your character. You're in a uniquely difficult position, giving secret identities and all. And if I could make it easier for you, I would. But Tikki would probably kill me before I even got the words out. The answers, to your problems. And I don't really know much about romance anyways. The Kwame's words grew rushed as he seemed to be struggling for the right words to say, before adding, But I do know one thing. It's that if something's meant to be, it'll happen, so there's no use worrying about it until it does. Plagg gulped down his final bite of cheese as if to shut himself up, then flew back to bed and rolled up in the blankets once again. Adrien looked after him, trying to process the random and surprisingly thoughtful jumble of words his Kwame had just spurted, and he felt a new peace grow inside him as he followed the Kwame's example and curled back up under the covers. Maybe Plagg was right. Maybe he didn't have to rush things. After all, it wasn't really his choice if they wanted him or not. It would be nearly impossible not to admire the two girls with such incredible spirit and winsome character. Perhaps he could be content being their friend until things became more clear. Ladybug still took his breath away. Their evening together had definitely proven that. When he was with Marinette, it felt like an empty space inside him had finally been filled. With Marinette, he could be himself, and she was funny and kind and beautiful. He blushed as the thoughts tumbled from his mind, and a new sense of comfort grew in his chest. For now he would wait, and let the situation play out with time. But it seemed a part of his heart had already decided, and perhaps it wouldn't be such a hard choice after all. Marinette breathed in deeply, a contented smile filling her face as she felt the cool rush of crisp, wintry night air. She nuzzled her chin deeper against her scarf as she continued wrapping a strand of lights around a wide bush, the rainbow-colored lights twinkling brightly against the dark, starlit sky. Lights from the house cast long shadows over glistening piles of snow that rested in a thin layer across the ground, and the night was brightened by the golden glow surrounding nearby street lamps. Marinette hummed softly to herself, happy to be doing her part for the greater work and enjoying the peaceful hum of voices and quiet bustle of the evening, as friends and strangers gathered around, adding bits of Christmas joy to the decided houses and apartments. Marinette glanced sideways to see Adrien busily at work cleaning up a window in preparation for some lights to be added to it, and she was once again grateful that out of all her classmates she had been assigned on the same team with him. After a bit of trial and error, she and Cat Noir discovered it was best to spread people out in organized groups, each with a more experienced leader and mixing together people from different backgrounds and associations. That way the numbers would be fairly even and everyone could do their part. It was strange not to be the one giving orders or climbing up on rooftops this time, but it was also kind of nice to be left with her own section to work on, and it was much less stressful than when all eyes and expectations were on her. She chuckled softly as she caught sight of Kim and another boy at a house across the street, as one of them had likely challenged the other to a snow shoveling contest, and they were now flinging snow off the driveway as if their lives depended on it. Get a load of this, blonde dummy. Marinette stiffened as her senses grew on high alert, and she turned her head to see two teenage boys standing slightly to her right, who began casually threading lights on one of the bushes nearest to hers. They only appeared half interested in their work, as their sights were directed toward a boy standing near the weathered window frame, and Marinette sucked in an indignant gasp as she realized it was Adrien they were talking about. The taller one rolled his eyes while the other let out a contemptuous snort. Look at those skinny arms. The only useful thing that kid can do is show his face. Why is he even here? Probably just trying to get more followers. I can't stand people like that. He's probably never worked a day in his life. Imagine being in high school and still being dressed by your dad. The other boy snickered, then struck a ridiculous stance with a mocking sneer. And did you see him pose for all those pictures earlier? The taller one knocked his friend in the ribs and turned his gaze toward Adrien, narrowing his eyes with a scornful smirk. As if the famous fashion model would ever dirty his fingertips scrubbing up a window. I bet he's not even working, it's just faking it to make himself look good. What a selfish loser. Marinette's eyes widened and she glanced over at Adrien, who was working a ways away with his back to them. But he was clearly still within earshot, and Marinette saw his shoulders were tense and his head had lowered slightly. How can you say that? Marinette hissed, spinning to face them as her eyes blazed with fury, and she almost wished she could actually burn holes in their smirking faces. That is completely insensitive, and you don't even know Adrien. The boys exchanged a condescending glance and leaned arrogantly against the side of the building next to them. Oh, and you do? Marinette's fists tightened as she glowered at them. As a matter of fact, I do know him. We'd go to school together, and Adrien is one of the nicest, kindest, most generous and supportive boys I've ever met. Unlike you two. She strode angrily forward and jabbed her finger in front of the nearest one as her voice rose heatedly. Who supposedly came to bring hope and joy to people, but instead all you can do is point out imagined flaws in someone else and stand around mocking him like a bunch of scavenger birds, picking on a stranger without the slightest reason to and letting your own work go to waste. Your behavior is completely rude and uncalled for, not to mention totally the opposite of what the project is about. Adrien has shown more care for people than either of you, and if it wasn't for him, there wouldn't even be any Christmas lights in the first place. A hush grew over the crowded work area, and Marinette froze as she realized she'd been shouting. The boys shifted uncomfortably before scowling at her and stalking away, causing the onlookers to go back to their work. Marinette breathed a sigh of relief just as a hand touched her shoulder. Startled, she flinched and spun around to see Adrien staring down at her, a strange and almost hopeful intensity filling his eyes. Adrien, what are you... Please tell me you didn't hear all that. Adrien shrugged. I'd been listening for a while now, since it was kind of hard not to, and I appreciate you standing up for me, but... His eyes grew serious again, and he held his shoulders firmly, though his touch was still gentle, and he seemed almost hesitant. How did you know about the lights, Marinette? What made you think it was me? A million thoughts seemed to slam into Marinette's head as she scrambled to come up with an answer. Well, you're always so generous and thoughtful, and it had to be someone rich, so not that you're doing it just because you're rich, but you do really care about people, and you know what it's like to have a hard Christmas, and I think Ladybug might have mentioned it once when she was picking up some cookies. She finished rapidly, wincing as she peeked up to see how he would take it. Adrien studied her carefully for a moment, then stepped back with a soft smile. Well, thanks again for what you did, and for all the compliments, he added, touching his hand to his neck with a slight grin, then gave a wave as he walked back to the windows he'd been working on. Marinette resisted the urge to smack her forehead and instead grit her teeth as she turned to concentrate on her own work. Great, now she just made Ladybug look like a big tattletale. What choice did she have? How could she have been so careless? No one knew that about Adrien except Ladybug. Ladybug and Cat Noir. Her eyes darted back to the blonde-haired boy who had finished his task and was now standing amidst a group of children, teasing and laughing with them and giving them turns riding on his back. Adrien had never asked her to keep it a secret. Only Cat Noir did. The only person who could possibly recognize her from that slip of information would be Cat Noir, since he was the one who told her about it in the first place. So why had Adrien been so taken aback by it? There was no reason for him to be suspicious. Unless... Her next thought struck her like a thunderbolt, and Marinette gasped as she almost fell headlong into the bush. Adrien was Cat Noir. Alarm bells sounded in her mind as her brain pleaded with her to ignore that thought and laugh it off as some crazy coincidence. But her heart had already accepted it, and it was the only explanation that made sense. It had to be him. A few months ago she would never have considered it, but now the similarities were strikingly clear. Kind, brave, selfless, giving, and uncommonly courteous. Not that those traits alone could identify him, as there must be some other boys who could fit that description. But hundreds of events and mishaps were swiftly filling her mind and clicking into place, like missing pieces to a formerly unsolvable puzzle. All the times Cat was late when Adrien was caught up in an Akuma attack. All the times Adrien would treat Ladybug with familiarity and slip back into his former shell again. Same golden tousled hair, same earnest, captivating eyes, a little socially awkward yet filled with compassion, charisma, and an endless concern for people. The same readiness when he caught her, the same gentleness in his voice, the same honesty and vulnerability that surprised her when she least expected it, and the same adorable look that begged her to stay. His awkward habits, his tiny mannerisms, the little comments he would share in the difficulties of his home life. His boundless optimism and persistent courage, not to mention his undeniable skills of fluent Chinese and swordplay. She blushed as she thought of the time she had literally confessed her love to him, and remembered that Cat Noir said he liked hamsters too. Could it really be him? She had once thought Cat Noir was a reckless, arrogant flirt, and would never have even tolerated putting him on the same par as Adrien, who was admittedly one of the most gracious and gentlemanly boys she'd ever known. But over time she'd learned Cat Noir's antics were more of a facade he put on, and his intentions were actually wholehearted, devoted, and sweet. Now that he'd stopped trying to impress her, it was as if a new side of him was finally allowed to come free, and she was constantly touched by how thoughtful and supportive her loyal partner was. The puns were another story, and at times his persistence with them nearly drove her mad, but they made her laugh too, and often lightened the tension when they were up against difficult villains. Although she had heard him drop one once or twice, she had never thought of Adrien as a punner. But after spending time with him the other night, she knew he most assuredly was, and he could easily match Cat Noir's any day. Marinette's breathing was shallow as her mind tried to take this all in at once. She felt herself sway slightly as the impact of her discovery seemed to put her system in overload. Her heart pounded wildly and she felt herself growing faint. "Are you okay?" A mittened hand steadied her by the elbow, and the wind blowing against her cheeks had died down as a sheltering, warm presence stood by her side. Marinette choked back a cough and tried to shake herself out of the chaos exploding in her mind, her eyes widening as she stared up into two dazzling green ones. Yes, I'm fine. I just need to catch my breath for a moment." Adrien nodded understandingly, his arms still lightly tucked around her for support as he ushered her over to a small table near the porch steps. "Why don't you wait here for a moment while I get you something to drink?" Before she knew what was happening, Adrien had guided her down to a place on the step and returned a few seconds later bearing a small paper cup with wisps of steam and hints of chocolate rising from it. "Do you like hot chocolate?" Marinette could only manage a small nod as she accepted the offered drink and stared stiffly down at it as the warmth from the cup sent a contented shiver down her back, but she found herself smiling briefly. Adrien took his seat next to her, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a pair of cookies lumped up in a napkin. "I brought some cookies too. Nothing like a few cookies to bake you feel better." Marinette's jaw dropped slightly and she squeezed her eyes shut and blinked several times as she stared into his kind, smiling face and was almost certain he'd been wearing cat ears a second ago. Adrien passed her one before taking a bite of his own and closing his eyes in delight. These are amazing, Marinette. And you put passion fruit in them. I almost never find desserts with that flavor. It's my favorite kind." Passion fruit is one of my favorites, especially when it's mixed with desserts. The memory echoed through her head as Marinette felt her heart begin to settle, and the reality was finally accepted in her mind. There was no going back now. Cat Noir might have made that one. Marinette was surprised to hear her own voice ring out, and more surprisingly, it was crystal clear and almost held a hint of amusement. Adrien raised an eyebrow, and Marinette almost laughed at how hard he tried to look surprised. "Oh, really? I didn't know he worked on them with you. Was it fun? Was I charming? Did you enjoy my company? Did I do something wrong? Can I come again?" Marinette's heart softened as her mind filled in his unspoken questions, and she struggled to keep a teasing grin off her face. "Well, if you call getting covered in flour and disgracing yourself in front of the city's superhero fun, then yes, it was." Adrien tilted his head with concern. "I'm sure it wasn't that bad, and don't all bakers get a little messy?" "More than a little when you're racing to mix ingredients and trying to slip flour down each other's necks, you dork." Marinette stifled a laugh from the memory and hurried to relieve him from the anxious expression growing across his face. "Actually, it was really fun, even if I did drop a few hundred things. And Cat Noir was really helpful, and his cheerful attitude made the whole process go a lot smoother." Adrien's shoulders relaxed, and he smiled contentedly. "I'm glad you were able to have some help with it. You've contributed so much to this project, and that must have been a lot of work for you to handle on your own." Marinette shrugged, her eyes drifting shyly to the snowy ground in front of them, but Adrien hadn't finished. "You're always so kind and generous, giving so much love and attention to others without ever asking for any in return. And you have a tenacious spirit that never gives up until the job is done. You're amazing, Marinette. You really are my everyday Ladybug." Marinette's heart froze as the words which had once brought her so much joy echoed bitterly throughout her head. His everyday Ladybug. This wasn't just Adrien, her classmate, comparing her to the image of the beloved and commendable superhero. This was Cat Noir, the boy who fought beside her every day and supposedly adored Ladybug with everything he had. She knew she should be flattered, touched even, that he would compare her to someone he knew so well and held in so high esteem. But the secrets that lay between them seemed more vast than ever, and the weight of the implications to discovery engulfed her like a darkening cloud. Adrien had no idea who she really was, and Marinette was just ordinary, second place to the girl of his dreams. Someone to fill the time in between every day when his preferred hero was gone. Adrien seemed to notice the sudden change in her expression and touched her shoulder again tenderly. "Is everything okay, Marinette?" Marinette felt the ache in her chest grow as she found herself lost in a sea of green, his gentle tone and affectionate gaze sending waves of emotion flowing through her, and she closed her eyes before her heart was swept away for good. Mostly fine. I just need to go home to get something. My work here's mostly finished, and I can do the rest when I come back. Miranette's resolve faltered as she heard her voice quiver uncertainly, and she angrily forced herself to hold back tears. She avoided his gaze and hastily brushed herself off as she moved to throw away her cup and tucked her gloves deeper into her sleeves. Adrien followed her and quickly took the empty cup from her hands. I'll take that for you, and I can finish up the other things for you too. It's mostly just cleanup work that needs to be done, and if you're not feeling well, you've every right to stay home. You've already helped more than enough. Marinette gave him a weak smile and nodded her head gratefully before hurrying down the street and ducking into an alleyway. Leaning her head against the cold, rough wall, she breathed in a shaky sigh to steady herself. Why did he have to be so nice? How could things ever be normal between them now that she knew? What should she do now? Something brushed softly against her cheek, and Marinette looked up and offered her hands out to the small red Kwame hovering beside her. What's wrong, Marinette? You've been acting strange for the past hour, and I've never known you to turn down some time with Adrien like that. It's him, Tikki. He's Cat Noir. The words were soft and tremulous, but the truth rang out as clear as a piece of glass. Tikki's eyes widened and she seemed about to protest, but Marinette shook her head to stop her. It's no use, Tikki. I know it's him. The question now is, what do I do? Tikki paused, her eyes doubtful, before a knowing smile came across her face. Well, now at least you know you don't have to choose between them, since the boy you love has been your partner all along. But that's just it, Tikki. It would be one thing if I was just Ladybug, but I'm Marinette too, which means he only loves one side of me. And I'm not even sure he has those feelings for Ladybug anymore. Not to mention, now I have to go to school and act like everything is perfectly fine and pretend I'm not sitting directly behind my crime-fighting partner. What if I make a mistake and mess something up? What if I do something that makes him recognize me? Marinette's voice rose as she clutched her head anxiously and began pacing back and forth. Oh, this is a disaster, Tikki! I just discovered Cat Noir's identity! Tikki held a warning hand to her lips, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. Shh, keep it down, Marinette, or the whole city will discover it too. Marinette clasped her hands over her mouth and glanced around before continuing on in a frenzied, hushed tone, slightly above a whisper. Forget about my love problems. This could mean the end of the world. We aren't supposed to know each other's identities. What if this is the same as what happened with Cat Blanc and I've just doomed us all again? Tikki flew up beside her consolingly. You're a smart girl, Marinette. You can't blame yourself for figuring out something that was right in front of you, and you don't even know for sure that it's him. It may be more dangerous now if you do know, and you'll have to be extra careful. But just because Bunnick said it wasn't supposed to happen that way doesn't mean it was never supposed to happen at all. Marinette felt her panic subside slightly, and a hopeful peace rose in her heart. I hope you're right, Tikki. She looked up with determination. One thing's for sure, I'm not going to keep more secrets than I have to. I've made that mistake before, and I'm not going to make it again. Cat Noir deserves to know, she added softly. Tikki nodded in agreement, and with a few words, Marinette transformed into Ladybug and swung herself up to wait to break the news to her all-too-familiar partner, who also just happened to be the boy of her dreams. Ladybug tried to wait patiently and calm her nerves, but her body seemed to have a mind of its own. Her limbs were restless, and she found herself constantly moving about, a sense of fear and dread growing with every passing minute. She had regretted her text the moment she sent it, but it was too late. Cat Noir was already on his way here. How was she supposed to tell him? Oh, hey, Cat Noir. You know that thing you've been dying to know and I constantly warn you about? Turns out I was careless, and now, surprise! I know your secret identity, and the world may or may not end because of it. Ladybug let out a groan and kicked up some loose snow in frustration. What would he think of her? What did he think of her? And what if she was wrong? That thought made her stop short, and the cold air seemed to pierce through her heart and burn all the way down her throat. What if he wasn't Adrien and just had a few things in common? What if she was making a big deal about nothing and only believing what her heart wanted to think? Of course, that had to be it. Her stupid heart had been so discombobulated and distraught over picking between two impressive boys that her mind had forged them into one, and now she was wasting all her fears on something that was completely constructed and not at all based on reality. A rattle sound came from behind her, and Ladybug flinched, half expecting Cat Noir to be there, before realizing it had only been the wind. Cat Noir? Oh no, he would be heartbroken. She would be raising his hopes with little to no proof and then plunge them into the ground like the cold-hearted half-wit she was. She couldn't tell him, not now, not without knowing more, and yet she did know more. She knew it was him. It had to be. Moments ago, the conclusion had seemed so natural, so right that she had accepted it almost immediately, and even Tikki barely tried to contest it. Regardless of the consequences, she was definitely right. Wasn't she? Ladybug sighed as she nibbled her gloved fingertips and walked back to wait near the edge. Only one way to find out. Cat Noir landed on the roof and found Ladybug pacing anxiously, mumbling quietly to herself. "Milady, is something wrong? I came as soon as I got your message." Ladybug froze, a guilty expression on her face as she stared up at him, then blurted out in a half-whisper, "I think I know your secret identity." Cat Noir stumbled backwards as he felt like he'd been hit by a pile of rocks, and his mind struggled to process her words as she continued speaking and pacing hastily, a shameful look on her face as she hugged her arms tightly against herself. "I know I'm the one who always told you to be careful about it, and I should have just stopped thinking about it the second it entered my mind, but I didn't, and I wanted it to be true, but I'm scared to find out, and yet I know for sure it is." Cat Noir realized he'd been staring in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the onslaught of words and feelings she was throwing at him, but now took hold of her by the shoulders in an attempt to steady them both as he interrupted her panicky strides. "Maybe you're just jumping to conclusions." Though his heart deeply wished she wasn't. Ladybug shook her head. "There's no way for it to make sense otherwise, and it makes so much sense I don't know how I never guessed it before. Actually, I do know, because he used to act completely different. Well, the Cat Noir you anyway, but lately you've been acting more like the real you, and... Wait, you know the real me in regular life?" Ladybug froze, then nodded reluctantly. Cat Noir's eyes lit up as his heart squeezed and tightened with hope and apprehension. Ladybug tried to slip away, her voice growing dismissive as she added, "I mean, we haven't known each other for super long, and maybe it's better if we... Ladybug." She looked up at him as he gripped her shoulders with gentle firmness. "Who do you think I am?" He bent his head closer, his eyes pleading as he said gently, "Please, I need to know." She looked down, and he thought the suspense was going to drive him crazy, but then a soft whisper floated up to his ear. "Adrien." He felt his arms numbly slip to his sides as he stepped backwards in shock. He should deny it. His mind screamed at him to laugh it off as a joke and assure her his identity was safe, and yet she knew him in real life. This was the moment he had dreamed of for so long, and even if he denied it, wherever he went, he would forever be wondering who the girl without the mask really was. And she said she'd wanted to know who he was, too. She wanted him to be Adrien. A thought came to him, and his pulse quickened as a battle between hope and doubt warred inside him. He turned his gaze back to the girl who'd been the source of his joy and misery for so long. Ladybug was fiddling with her fingers anxiously, and he knew she was debating whether his silence was disappointment over her being wrong, or a confirmation that she was right. He took a small step towards her and asked cautiously, "Ladybug, is Adrien the other boy? The one you were in love with?" She ducked her head as a vibrant blush filled her cheeks, and she turned slightly away. Yes. If minds could explode, he was pretty sure that his had been swung up like an enormous balloon and popped in that exact moment. He stared dumbly at the small pigtailed figure in front of him as millions of pieces fought to snap into place at once. Ladybug seemed to misread his expression and buried her face in her hands, only to quickly pull them away, revealing a very guilty, heart-torn expression. "I'm so sorry, Cat Noir. It was ridiculous of me to even suggest such a thing, and I should have just kept it to myself, and I never meant to hurt your feelings or..." He stepped forward and took hold of her hands with a laughing smile. "Claws in." Her eyes widened as his transformation wore off in a rush of green light, and was replaced by an ordinary coat and a pair of mandarin sneakers. She stood frozen in silence, though her eyes never left his face. He squeezed her hands and lifted one up between them, drawing attention to his Miraculous and hoping to break her trance. You were right as always, my lady. She blinked as her eyes wandered to his ring and back up to him again. He slipped one hand away and used it to tug a strand of loose hair behind her ear, revealing the earrings hidden beneath. There was only one person it could be. He knew it was her. It had to be her. Do I get to know who you are, princess? He asked softly. Ladybug snapped into focus, taking a slight step back and beginning to pace slightly away as her former nervousness returned. That's the thing, I don't know. It's dangerous enough with just me knowing, but then again, if we both knew, it might give us an advantage and make it easier to... Her voice trailed off as she halted mid-step and slowly turned back to him. What did you call me? He grinned smugly, knowing she already knew the answer, though it was impossible to keep the joy swelling inside him from shining through his face. Ladybug's eyes widened and she stepped backwards as a light gasp escaped her lips. She clutched her hands around her head in frustration and despair. What was I thinking? You can't know who I am. How could I have been so careless? Master Suan was right to want to take the Miraculous away from me. This is going to be a disaster. I'm not worthy to be a hero. I can't even keep my own mouth shut. What is wrong with me? She moved as if to miserably throw herself forward onto the ground, but Adrien quickly slid his arms beneath her and set her back on her feet with a fond smile. Marinette, everything is going to be okay. He waited a moment, then added gently, May I see you? She peeked up at him through shamefully clasped fingers until she slowly drew her arms back to her sides and whispered the detransformation words as she cautiously regained her composure. Adrien's heart lit up as he watched the remarkable girl transform before him. A pair of familiar pink shoes and sparkling blue eyes stood hesitantly against the silvery white snow. So, you're not mad? Mad? Adrien's eyes widened in surprise, and he quickly swept her into a hug with a joyous smile. Why on earth would I be mad? You just made my greatest wish come true. Marinette leaned slightly away from him, her face filled with wonder and hesitant delight. Really? Even though it's just me? He pulled her closer and rested his forehead against hers. Especially because it's you. Adrien broke his stare and scooped her up as he joyfully swung her in a wide circle. Oh, I'm so relieved. I thought I was a horrible person. Marinette giggled as her feet returned to rest on the ground. Why? You're falling in love with two girls. He grinned sheepishly as Marinette's eyes widened in shock. You fell in love with me? Yeah, and it's been driving him crazier than a cat in a laser store. Came a raspy voice from between them as something black popped up out of Adrien's coat pocket and hovered close beside them. Adrien didn't miss Plagg's mocking tone and knew the mischievous calming was gleefully rubbing it in his face. Why, you little cheese gremlin, you knew it the whole time. I told you everything would work out. Plagg sent him a smug look, then grabbed a hold of Tikki, who had appeared beside Marinette, and the two Kwamis flew off to the other side of the roof. Adrien shook his head fondly as he watched them go, then turned his attention back to Marinette. Is he always like that? She asked, casting a wry look in the Kwami's direction. This is him being polite. Marinette giggled, and Adrien felt himself laugh softly too. Well, he is right about one thing. Everything did work out. His heart glowed at the smile she gave him, and he hugged her back into his chest again. I still can't believe it. She snuggled up closer against him, and they stood silently together for quite some time, neither wanting to pull away. A sharp ringing sound came from a nearby apartment, and Adrien felt a sudden jolt of fear course through his body, followed by a sickening sense of dread as his arms tightened desperately around the small treasure he'd only just found. A laughing sputter came from his shirt as Marinette pushed away from him. And I thought my dad gave suffocating hugs. I'm not going anywhere. Her face grew worried, and she placed a concerned hand on him as she took in his paralyzed expression. Adrien, are you okay? Your heart is beating like crazy, and you look like you've seen a ghost. Adrien stared numbly at her, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. Please, he whispered. Please tell me this is real. Oh, Kitty. Her hands briefly caressed his face, and he leaned into her touch, but was only dimly aware of soft woolen material easing away the cold as her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. He instinctively slipped his around her waist and pulled her closer to himself, but still felt he was half in a dream as her cheek pressed against his and a pleasing warmth tickled past his ear as she whispered, It's real. I promise you this is real. I'm not sure how long it'll last, but I know I would risk 1,000 lifetimes just to be in this one with you. I love you, Adrien. Adrien felt a tear slide down his cheek as he clung to her all the more tightly. This can't be real. It just can't. It's too perfect. Sorrow, agony, and longing washed over him in waves as he wept silently into her shoulder. Marinette didn't say a word, just leaned into his hold and gently slid her hands up and down his back. After a while, his cries lessened, and he began to breathe more steadily as his fear and distress slowly subsided, and a new hope tenuously built in his heart. Marinette pulled carefully away from him, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction and gentle understanding. See, I'm still here. Adrien ducked his head with a smile, half out of embarrassment and half from relief as he took in the wondrous girl before him. And it's really you, princess? You've been my lady this whole time? In response, she rose on her tiptoes and drew him closer to herself as she kissed him lightly on the cheek, just as she had at the picnic not too long ago. You're our everyday Ladybug, remember? She glanced up at him teasingly as he pressed a hand to his forehead.
No wonder I thought so. How could I have said that and been so blind?
Marinette laughed as she removed his hand from his head and took it between her own. No more than I was. Besides, your heart knew, even if your mind didn't. Adrien beamed back at her, his former excitement returning as he allowed himself to embrace the reality before him. So this really happened? You're in love with me, and I'm in love with you, and you're Ladybug and I'm Cat Noir? Marinette's eyes lit up as she smiled and nodded her head in assurance. I would never have guessed it, but yes, it's real. You don't have to worry about that. He chuckled as he leaned his head against hers with a laughing grin. That is exactly what a dream would say. I guess we have no choice but to promise each other that we'll never wake up. Adrien's eyes widened as Marinette sent him a saucy look. Their eyes sparkled with a softness and love that he knew he could fall into for a lifetime. I will gladly spend the rest of my life stuck in a dream with you, princess. It's us against the world, right? Always. Thanks for listening, and for your patience, seeing as I just finished this Christmas story in March. But I'm glad it's finally done, and I hope you enjoyed it. Which section was your favorite? Let me know in the comments, as I'd love to hear from you. Also, a special thank you to one of my brothers for coming up with the insults addressed to Adrien in this chapter. But yes, I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. Bye!